This is the end of the beginning. Welcome to today's show. If you needed any more evidence that Maui was a direct energy weapon, well, let me give you some. However, you probably shouldn't need any more evidence at this point because, well, cities don't fry like that. Towns don't fry like that. And wildfires don't start in places like Maui. But we live in a very, very, very dumb time period where people will not ask questions and they will not evaluate actual evidence. So what is needed is people like me and you to continue to try to sound the bullhorn to get people to see what's actually going on. So you may have heard before, after wildfires, apparently there's this thing called brain fire or fire brain, which supposedly is now a side effect of anyone who suffers from some type of fire, whether it's your house burning down or a wildfire that burns down your whole town, apparently. Of course, this is all made up because they're conditioning people to now get used to the fact that after wildfires, because they're going to become more and more common because the government is doing this, and they already know in advance that they're going to be doing this, so they're letting you know that if you experience any of these side effects, that it's normal, when in reality, it's not normal. The reason that they're telling you this is because people are having side effects from the direct energy weapon because microwave weapons have this effect on people's brains. Just imagine putting your brain in the microwave, or your head, I should say. Do you think the outcome's going to be good? You think the outcome is good when you put stuff in the microwave that's not supposed to be in there? No, it fries it, right? When you put foil in there or you put a fork in there, not a good idea. Putting your head in there, not a good idea. Well, now that people have been drilled with this direct energy weapon, we have stories like this, and this is what is a clear case of what is known as Havana syndrome. You may remember, I'll get into Havana syndrome. You may remember some stories about U.S. spies and, Havana syndrome. What is it? Is it a conspiracy? It's a mysterious microwave weapon that is being used. Oh, these are all real things, right? And these are all side effects of direct energy weapons, or can actually be used as direct energy weapons as well, because, just like things that happen with radiation can cause problems with your brain, like tumors and all sorts of things, right? I've covered this with the cell phone in the past, which those videos have been removed, another YouTuber covered it, and his videos were removed, talking about brain tumors and all sorts of problems with memory loss, etc., from cell phones and the radiation it was giving off, as well as the 5G towers. Well, in this case, when you have human beings being microwaved by a microwave weapon, of course it's going to fry people's brains, and that's why they come out with stories like this 2 weeks after the fire, called After the Blaze, Coping with Fire Brain. And again, they are normalizing this stuff. All of a sudden, folks, wildfires now cause something called fire brain. No one's ever heard of this in the past. Wildfires are things that actually do occur naturally, but not at the rate they're happening now because they're not natural. These are obviously controlled, self-started fires. But this is a way to get people prepared who are going to be suffering from massive side effects, especially on Maui. They don't want them to realize that it's actually from the microwaving, from the direct energy weapon that hit them. They want them to think it has something to do with the fumes that they're breathing in from the smoke, which of course can and does cause health problems, but not what they're claiming here. So look at this story. Many people escaped the deadly Maui wildfires, some in harrowing fashion, but their ordeal may not be over. The harmful effects of wildfire exposure don't disappear once the flames are extinguished, experts said. There's growing research, how convenient, that suggests breathing in the tiny particles from wildfire smoke can produce cognitive deficits which may appear in as little as 6 to 12 months or even years later. Surviving a near-death experience also raises the risk of post-traumatic stress with such symptoms as depression, sleep disorders, anxiety, and survivor's guilt, researchers said. And of course, I covered this a few days ago. I mentioned how they were starting to push mental health. That's also another effect, obviously, of having your brain microwave, depression, anxiety, those types of things, mental health, and of course the trauma and the realization that your whole home and community has been burned to the ground by the government that's supposed to work for you that has now gone rogue. So that would probably cause people to be pretty depressed and probably have some mental health problems. But of course, they're going to just tell you that these things are from the smoke and tiny particles in the smoke that are going to make people, as I continue on here, get things like Alzheimer's, almost memory loss. Again, this is Havana syndrome. I'll get into it more in the end of the video or the middle of the video with Havana syndrome, but let me continue what they're claiming here with fire brain. So they say, of course, the immediate most important thing is to survive, said Mark Weiskopf. That last name sounds pretty familiar, the creator of the Illuminati. Anyway, professor of environmental epidemiology and physiology at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, who studies the relationship between air pollution and brain health. It says, but unfortunately, those who do survive also may be vulnerable to both long and short-term effects on the brain caused by this exposure. Some survivors of wildfires describe their cognitive struggles after escaping the blaze as fire brain. Living with fire brain, Randy Gerhardt, 66, interesting age, and wife Sandy Knapp Gerhardt, 55, fled the 2018 Camp Fire in California. Interesting. You mean the one that was also a direct energy weapon? The deadliest and most destructive in the state's history, and noticed changes in themselves almost immediately. They would have clear mental pictures of an item they would be looking for, a tool, a lawn game, but couldn't recognize the new item they replaced it with. Other times they would walk into a room and not know where they were. So tell me, in the history of humanity, we're all, adults here, so we've all been around stuff before, right? So all of a sudden now, when we know they're using direct energy weapons, all of a sudden for the common folk out there who don't have brains, who believe it's an actual wildfire started by climate change, all of a sudden there's a new thing called fire brain. Oh, why? Oh, well, because now there's more fire, so it's becoming more rampant, so we're doing more studies on it. Oh, right, this is very convenient. Kind of how real convenient, like the same way that the government had planned to torch the United States of America and the countries around the world and needed a scapegoat to do it, or people would become suspicious because people know about direct energy weapons and also weather manipulation and weather control, such as HARP, et cetera, right? So Firebrain just emerges. And the example we're using is from 2018, the most obvious, other than Maui, direct energy weapon fire that our government started, and a couple leaves there. And now, after the fire, they can't remember where they are half the time. That's real normal. That goes and coincides with radiation and microwave energy weapons being directed at your skull. So Gerhardt, a retired salesman for Frito-Lay, had been used to a busy work schedule and just as robust slate of projects and hobbies. After the fire, he couldn't finish tasks, let alone get enough motivation to start them. He said, I didn't know what the heck was wrong with me. I built 7 houses, helped build 2 churches, used to work 65 to 70 hours a week. The couple chalked up their new behavior to stress. But this was different than stress, Gerhardt said. You wonder why you're being so worthless and lazy. maybe they're Democrats. She said, I'd have a list and not feel like doing any of it. Even my bills, I'd just let them sit there for a month. Even rebuilding a home in paradise took Gerhardt an uncharacteristically long 2 years. All my friends would ask, how's the house coming? And I just wouldn't work on it, he said. For a period of 2 years after the fire, Gerhardt and his wife met weekly with 5 other couples who were living in trailers set up on the property of a tile factory owned by a friend. The group, who dubbed themselves the Forever Friends, would talk and exchange information and what they were going through. He thinks it was that the group, he thinks it was in that group that someone first mentioned to him the idea of Firebrain. In chats with emergency room doctors since then, he was given further confirmation that what he was experiencing was not only real, but also common among fire survivors. Having his feelings and behaviors named made him feel less broken, he said. I feel vindicated. I wasn't crazy. What I was going through was normal. I wasn't weaker. So trauma related to climate change is what they go on to say here. Yeah, trauma related to climate change. Unbelievable. You mean trauma related to microwave energy weapons? How do people not understand this? I mean, have you ever seen, someone who's completely dumb, that goes no idea about anything, and I'm talking like radiation, stuff like that, like there's like, what? I try to use things that they might be able to think of or understand because they're so stupid. And I always mention The Hills Have Eyes. Have you ever seen clips of that movie? It's like a horror movie, and it's supposedly the after effects of a nuke, but it's really, you don't have to believe in nukes to understand it, but you could, because a lot of people don't. But the radiation effects of it, right? And what happens to these people, they come like mutants and things like that. And then you could look at history, right, and see what has happened to people from radiation experiments and mutations that have occurred to them and problems with their brains. So I use that as one, and they're like, no, oh, okay, well, that's what radiation would do? Yeah, that's what radiation would do. Does that look like fun? But they don't believe that radiation is coming out of 5G towers and all these other things, of course, because the government would never do that to us. They love us. They care about us. So now they're using trauma related to climate change. Trauma for surviving natural disasters related to climate change is also different from other one-time events such as car accidents or sexual assault. People see the environment as a refugee, a positive healing thing. When something you see as positive turns against you, that's a difficult thing for many people to deal with. You can't even make it up. I mean, really. There's added stress from not being able to predict whether survivors will be exposed again. Climate will be sustained stress. That'll be harder to treat. So these groups of people are meeting who are affected by the California fire, and they're all thinking that what has occurred here is fire brain. They're dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder from a fire and tiny particles that may have gone up into their nose from the smoke. Right. You've been hit with a direct energy weapon, okay? You're being hit with what's invisible weapons and things that are microwaving you on the inside. That's why these things are happening. That's why there's such a rise in dementia and Alzheimer's and other things. Not to mention, of course, a certain poison that people are taking, but that's another story for another day. So for those of you that don't know, there was a story out there about Havana syndrome. Yeah, that's right, Havana syndrome. Spies supposedly were getting very, very sick, and they're blaming it on Cuba and other countries were attacking American civilians. No. Don't worry, it's not other countries. It's our own country attacking their own civilians with direct energy weapons, and we're seeing it right now. So let's take a look at Havana syndrome and the comparisons between what this guy was feeling and going through and Havana syndrome.
This mysterious sickness called the Havana syndrome. It's affected a small group of American diplomats and spies overseas. And now, in a new report that just came out, just within the last maybe 90 minutes or so, you've got this panel of experts working for U.S. intel agencies saying that the most likely cause is microwave energy from some kind of external source. They don't really know what that source is. The backdrop here, since late 2016, you've seen hundreds of U.S. officials in more than a dozen countries coming forward to report symptoms believed to be related to this Havana syndrome. But last month, the CIA came out and said, hey, most of these people don't actually fit the profile. A couple dozen do. That's where the mystery is. And that's what this new report is hoping to shine a light on. Ken Delanian is following the story for us. So Ken, break this down a little bit, right? Because we're now centering on those, I think, a couple dozen diplomats, most of them related to the initial incident reporting in 2016. They get these really weird symptoms. We don't know what it is. And now these experts are saying it's probably microwave energy, which is the clearest sign yet, right? The most definitive evidence yet or answer yet that we have for this.
Yeah, you nailed it, Hallie. It's a little bit confusing because we've been reporting for 3 years now about hundreds of diplomats coming forward and saying they believe they have these symptoms that could be Havana syndrome. And then last month, the CIA comes out with his interim assessment that says most of those people do not fit the profile. They found alternate explanations, and it kind of poured cold water on the whole idea. But if you read it carefully, it said, hey, there are about 24 cases where we can't rule out foreign involvement. We have no idea what caused it. And those are the cases, it looks like, that this panel of experts studied very closely. And this was a panel of outside experts, scientists, technologists, and U.S. intelligence officials. And they had access to classified information. They interviewed victims. They interviewed experts. And what they concluded was the most plausible explanation is directed energy from an external source. Now, they didn't identify, as you said, they didn't identify a device. And they weren't even looking at the question of who might be responsible. But just by concluding that, hey, this is likely directed energy, they have bolstered the long-standing hypothesis by the intelligence community that this is likely the Russians, because the Russians have a history of studying this technology. Now, the problem with that, Hallie, is they've been looking for years, the spies have, and they've not come up with any evidence to point to Russia, even though CIA Director William Burns went to Moscow and warned the Russians that if they were doing this, there would be consequences. It's a real mystery. But this report does move the ball forward in the sense of saying, look, we think these symptoms are not explained by any other phenomenon. They're not psychosomatic. Right. People are not making this up. They were hit by some kind of energy, and it caused real damage to them.
It's been a phenomenon that has confounded U.S. intelligence officials for years. Reports of baffling medical ailments, headaches, extreme fatigue, vertigo, even brain injuries that have been reported by over 1,100 U.S. diplomats and spies all over the world. These symptoms have a name, Havana syndrome, because they were first reported among officers serving the U.S. Embassy in Cuba's capital. But what was behind these outbreaks, and who or what was causing them? First of all, these symptoms are real, and in some cases quite serious.
There are things that are identified in their MRIs and CAT scans as showing traumatic brain injury.
But I also found something else that's pretty important. Ever since the first reports of Havana syndrome surfaced 5 years ago, powerful members of Congress and much of the U.S. news media have played up the idea that these health ailments must have been caused by hostile attacks by a foreign power, either the Cubans themselves or, as the reports spread worldwide, the Russian intelligence services under the firm control of Vladimir Putin.
We may have ongoing activity targeting U.S. government officials.
The mysterious invisible weapon.
Directed energy attacks.
I've learned that U.S. investigators have found zero evidence to back up any of these claims. In this podcast, I talked to John Cohen, until last April, the chief of intelligence at the Department of Homeland Security, speaking publicly for the first time.
You would expect at some point you would find something, some type of evidence that would lead you to at least better understand what was happening, and I never saw it.
So, of course, they like to label Havana syndrome as a conspiracy, right? But all one would have to do is do research on declassified reports that suggest that Havana syndrome is a result of an energy weapon, right? So here's an article here, a newly obtained declassified report prepared for the Director of National Intelligence by a panel of experts appears to show conclusively that Havana syndrome, a cluster of unexplained symptoms experienced by diplomats and government personnel abroad, is not a naturally occurring health problem. It does not reach any conclusions about who or what may be responsible, but suggests that an unknown device or weapon using pulsed electromagnetic energy remains a plausible explanation. That's because that's exactly what it is. The document was declassified after the James Madison Project, a nonprofit dedicated to reducing government secrecy, sued to obtain further information on what is called AHI or AHIS, the official term used to designate the syndrome. The U.S. government is covering up evidence as to what AHIs are. I wonder why. Because they don't want people to know ahead of time, because people might realize that they're getting this and suffering from it because all of a sudden, they're getting hit with a direct energy weapon, but they don't want people to realize it's a direct energy weapon. They want them to realize or think that it's climate change and that it's a naturally occurring thing when blood is all over our government's hands, and they don't care. They do not care. So this goes on to say that the declassified report, officially titled AHI Analysis of Potential Causal Mechanisms, also says that pulsed electromagnetic energy, particularly in the radio frequency range, plausibly explains the core characteristics of at least some reported medical conditions and finds that sources exist that could generate the required stimulus, are concealable, and have moderate power requirements. Such electromagnetic signals, the report continues, could be propagated with low loss through air for tens to hundreds of meters and with some loss through most building materials. So we suddenly have all of these people in Maui who are going to begin feeling this, right, within now and the next year. That's what they're telling us, right? They're going to experience fire brain. And the example we're using is California, to recap, where people are meeting together, can't figure out why they have memory loss, and all think it's from trauma caused from fires, right? Or particles, as the article said, tiny particles that went up their nose. Now, there are many people that have gone through losing their home to a fire. We've never heard of this before. There are people who have lost their homes to forest fires. We've never heard this before. We're hearing it now because something has to be an excuse for the things that people in Maui are about to go through and feel. And they're going to tie it to mental health. And all of these people are going to believe it because these invisible rays and these invisible weapons that they use, such as, it's the same thing with 5G. All these stories that you hear about young teens doing these things to themselves, offing themselves, taking their own lives, or suffering from real serious problems, is all based off of 5G. It's all based off of the technology that's out there. They don't want you to think that. Now, I'm not saying that things like social media and stuff don't add to the depression and the anxiety that people have from this narcissistic, disgusting, insane world that we live in. But I'll tell you right now, 5G certainly amplifies it, okay? And direct energy weapons And being there when these types of things happen are going to have long-term effects on your brain and your body. So what the government do? What did they decide? Well, they decided to come up with something to write those away so that they have an answer for it. So that people, when they hear this, when people from Maui start coming out and saying more and more that they have this problem, they're having memory loss problems, they're having Alzheimer's, etc. Well, the government already has the answers called Firebrain, and the liberals will repeat it, and they'll say that it's a conspiracy, that anybody's questioning, calling it what is Havana syndrome, or really just side effects from frequencies, direct energy weapons pointed directly at them. In other words, just want to call it what it is, which is microwaving human beings, which is what they're doing. So this is what's occurring, folks. I mean, how you don't connect the dots is beyond me. We're 2 weeks later, people are already suffering from firebrain. Why is this out there? Well, because they need to start getting these stories out there, because more people from that island are going to have diseases, ailments, certain problems. They'll all label them mental health problems because they don't want, you to realize what it is. So they'll say, oh, you're having mental health problems. We don't want you to know that you have a tumor growing on your brain or your brain has been microwaved. So, we're just going to say this and that. And, you'll just deal with it. And everybody out there will believe it because they believe everything that we spew. And we always have an answer in place before people can ask a question. So that's what this is. That's when you see stories like this come out. Yesterday about After the Blaze, coping with firebrain. Oh, well, let's not connect the dots, shall we? Let's just eat up what they feed us because they could be so trusted, right? It's an absolute joke that nobody is figuring out what's going on. And to me, this is just more confirmation. This is more evidence that Maui was a direct energy weapon. We don't need any more evidence to know that. I mean, all one has to do is use these two things called their eyes. And if you have one eye, well, one eye, and we know there's a lot of optometrists out there and eyeball lovers, well, use those eyes then. Use your eyes and evaluate what looks like a bomb went off. It looks worse than the pictures that have come out of Crane, doesn't it? And people are telling me this is a wildfire. Well, the trees are still standing and they still try to explain it away. And only the zombies out there actually take those talking points that the mainstream media gives and uses them because they don't have brains in their heads. But anybody out there with eyes can see that this is a direct energy weapon attack. Okay, so then when you take actual visual evidence, if that's not enough, now suddenly these people are going to believe these stories out there about firebrain? I mean, are these libs going to actually take this and go, oh yeah, well that's firebrain. There's post-traumatic stress disorder from fire. And not just that, people have memory loss from fire. What? No, this would be something that occurs when their brains are getting microwaved. This would be something like Havana syndrome. Things that are quote unquote conspiracy theories. I mean, conspiracy facts. Because let's be real. We are under attack. All of the citizens of the world are under attack by their own governments. America, it is going to continue on and continue on. The entire West Coast, less than 2 weeks after Maui, is getting flooded out, fired out, earthquaked out. They are cleaning out areas where there is large populations of trees and flattening those out, right? They're bringing in FEMA. They're doing all these things right in front of our eyes, yet nobody sees it. It's pretty incredible. I thank everybody for being here. I hope you're all doing well. God bless all of you as always and your families.